All right, in this episode, I bring back filmmakers Barrett, Burgin, and Jake Taylor to talk about the term Christian. What does that mean? There's some pushback on this. Who do we affiliate with? Who do we identify with outside of Latter-day Saints? Anyone? Are we a part of Christianity as a whole? Is there danger in doing that? Danger, I mean, in the sense of, do we need to watch out how we're identifying ourselves or who we're identifying ourselves with? Are we really part of the Christian right? Politically, I think sometimes we are. That's the way we probably would vote most of the time. What does the Christian right think of Latter-day Saints? This is a great discussion, fabulous discussion. This episode is brought to you by Gospel on the Nile. I love Egypt. It is my favorite trip. If you have not been able to do this trip yet, this is a bucket list trip that allows you to see some incredible sights. You're going to learn more about the temple and your own personal experience in the temple than you will anywhere else outside of the temple itself. Incredible, incredible temples and the pyramids, obviously. A trip packed full of sights and education. Go to CwicMedia.com, up to the top, trips and events, and scroll down to Gospel on the Nile. We've got a few trips next year in February, March, and March next year. I'm leaving tonight for a trip to Cairo. I would love to see you on one of these trips. Here we go. All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. In this episode, we bring back Barrett Burgin and Jake Taylor. How are you guys doing?
Doing great. Thank you.
All right, we're going to talk about something I think very important, very relevant to our time, especially our time right now, in terms of conflict between Protestantism and we'll call it Mormonism, and an understanding of where do Latter-day Saints fit in the religious landscape among a majority Protestant group, both politically, religiously, culturally. Where are we at, and how did we get here?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have read some books over the past year, chief among them being this book, A Peculiar People, by the BOU professor and I believe Department of History chair. His name is J. Spencer Fluman. And it puts forward this narrative of like why 19th century, and I think by extrapolation, thus 20th and 21st century Protestants can often be so vitriolic in their hatred toward Latter-day Saints in particular. Like why us? Why are we in the eye of Sauron, so to speak, so much as to like what appears to be true hatred, or at the very least, just wanting to brush us aside and say, stop trying to say you're like us or you believe in Christ. Just get out of the way.
Certainly vitriolic.
Yeah, very vitriolic. And for Dr. Fluman, the central thesis is something like this, that at the turn of the, well, I don't know exactly how that idiom works. Is it the turn of the 18th century, if it's at the end? I don't know. The early 1800s. Mm-hmm. In the early 1800s, America is a freshly born nation, and religious freedom is still very new. And you have all of these different Protestant sects, mainly, who are combating with each other for theological vindication and ultimately political supremacy in terms of influencing the body politic of this newly democratic nation. And then guess who pops up on the scene in 1820? Is our good friend, Prophet Joseph Smith. And so this arisal of new, what they would call enthusiastic religions that are outside of the pale of normal, formal Protestant Christendom, they raise all these questions of like what counts as Christian, and even more than that, what counts as religion, period, and is Mormonism just a scam, which is something that I think we are both probably very familiar with, is this concept of Joseph Smith being the con man, and he's trying to dupe these people out of their money and their belief in their time. But that shifts with time away from just false religion, or like a non-religion, a fake religion, to false religion, heretical religion as Latter-day Saints continue to prove themselves persistent and relevant in American religious debate and politics, because you can't separate the two, especially in somewhere like Missouri and Nauvoo, where one of the major reasons why the Latter-day Saints were kicked out is because they were growing in numbers to the point where they had political influence, and the local majorities did not like that at all.
Yeah, I mean, he kind of goes through where you know you have those. I think he covers 4 phases, right? Where you're starting off as not really a religion. It's made up. It's not really a religion. It's some type of I don't know what the word I'm looking for. Some kind of mystical because of the founding, right? Some kind of mystical Christianity that isn't really religion. Moving into okay, maybe it's religion, but it's a false religion. And then you have polygamy come up, which is now it's barbaric, and then you move from okay. What is it, 1990? You or 1890? You no longer have the polygamy, so you're accepted a little bit, but you're very much over here.
Well, and accepted on certain conditions, which which historians have done some great work on this. That there was a very deliberate assimilation choice made at that time in the late 1800s and early 1900s, where it's like, okay, in order to survive, we're going to have to align with the then Republican Party, and then just kind of stayed that way in some ways, even while the members at the time were the rank and file members were more Democrat at that time and sympathized with that. The institution of the church was very much like, okay, in order to exist, we're going to have to assimilate to Eastern Christian sensibilities. And I would even say, outside of evangelical or Protestant, creedal Christian demands, where it's like, fine.
You're saying Eastern, you mean Eastern United States?
Eastern United States, sorry, not Eastern, like
Orthodox.
The Eastern United States, as Latter-day Saints were in the West. And that I do think that power dynamic has defined. I mean, we all learn about this stuff growing up as Latter-day Saints too, in Ohio and Illinois and Missouri, and we all know about like literally an extermination order, and that there are all these factors, but Latter-day Saints and our very existence has been a thorn in the side of American Christendom from the very beginning. And to your point, Greg, it just takes different shapes and forms. At one point it's plural marriage. At one point, all the way down to, we have political power or the God makers. It's like, well, you don't believe the right things about the Godhead. And Jake, do you want to pick up from there? Kind of.
Yeah. And if I may, I think it leads into this sort of like assimilative impulse. It leads into another book, which I must say off the bat is certainly more, academically leftist in a way that I don't necessarily agree with on a lot of her claims. But the book Jesus and John Wayne, I think, paints a pretty clear picture of the culture that Latter-day Saints by default are trying to assimilate into, starting with the early 1900s and those purposeful efforts to say, no, we are Americans. We're all Americans here. We're all Christians here. We're not practicing polygamy. Let's just shove that under the ground and pretend like that never happened. We're just like you guys. And they turn to us and say, no, you're not. And the vitriol is still there. And that frankly leads us to our good friend, Mark Driscoll, and people like him nowadays that carry forward a really, I think, clear cultural through line from the early 1800s in American Protestantism and the hatred towards Latter-day Saints to right now.
Well, and to build on that, like, I live here in Tennessee. I grew up here in Tennessee. I had a great interfaith experience growing up. A lot of fantastic friends who are Baptist, who are Methodist, who are evangelical, although evangelical is kind of its own thing, especially when it comes to us as in continuing that through line, as Jake said. So I have firsthand experience with this, and both like having strong interfaith relationships and also feeling and noticing the continuation of like let's just call it what it is, anti-Mormon sentiment and rhetoric and belief. And that this is like what we saw in Michigan, or the responses to the to the assassination of Charlie Kirk, like, because it was in Utah, like I cannot express enough how much this is like a sentiment that is everywhere. I'm sure you're familiar with the Pew Research that was done, Greg, where Latter-day Saints have now decreased in popularity and trust to the point that we're like the most hated religious group, while conversely we have the most positive view of other faiths. And I think that's great. I think it's like our doctrine accounts for it, right? We believe there's truth in all things, and that any good expression of faith, Christian or otherwise, is valid as people are.
13th article of faith.
Exactly. It's the 13th article of faith.
What do you think about that research though with Pew? It's, I've thought about that a lot, and I thought because as far as practicality, I don't know that people actually feel that way about Latter-day Saints in terms of people. That's not my experience. In fact, it's actually the opposite. Theologically, that's different for sure. And once you put it into the theological, place, and that's really what the survey is, right? It's about the different denominations and whatnot. But I kind of get a sense that the answer to that study is, where do I place their theology? Mm-hmm. More than us being hated. And I'm not saying there isn't a section of people that say they hate us. I get more of a sense of, I am going to rank the theologies here.
Yes, no.
Where I think people are.
I mean, I don't know how much you read the internet comments around, and of course, internet comments are always going to be more inflammatory. But around all of the media attention today, like the response to American Primeval, and I was on another podcast talking about this, and we have the screenshots. Hundreds of these where it's like, we never finished the job, in Missouri, and like,
right.
And people say this kind of stuff all the time about groups of people.
But it exists. It's there.
I don't think we need to, be looking over our shoulder like, oh, people hate me because I'm Mormon. To your point, I think Latter-day Saints as individuals and even as communities, people respect and are like, well, they believe just the craziest stuff, but they're really nice, and they'll serve you. And even our response to what happened in Michigan just demonstrates that. I saw that that was happening, and I felt a swell of gratitude and pride and humility, and just like, that is the right answer, right? I think as we're talking about, kind of getting really clear on these lines, we need to maintain the peacemaking and peacekeeping attempts and those good relationships, right? But the point is, it did happen, and the point is, it did happen over theology for sure. And what happened in Michigan is an extreme and isolated expression of a more common sentiment, which is that ultimately the church, the theology, Mormonism, whatever it is. We can dig up all the political cartoons. I saved a bunch of them from our time, earlier in U.S. history, and like, this is continued. It will continue. And I think the irony for me, Greg, is that, like, this is just a little anecdote, but I went to a high school with maybe 15 or 20 Latter-day Saints, and maybe, Jake, tell me if this kind of resonates with you too. But sometimes there's kind of a temptation to almost be to be quiet about it, right? To kind of be circumscript about, like, oh, I want to tell them, but if you start talking about Joseph Smith or something, it's like, and then also Joseph Smith, and it's like, I don't want people to know that I'm a Latter-day Saint. And that was kind of the approach that I found among my peers in Knoxville, not just my high school, but like other high schools, is there's sort of this, like, we make sure you're focusing on Jesus Christ. And then, like, if the time is right, you express who you are. And I just kind of bucked that because I'm proud to be a Latter-day Saint, and I wore it on my sleeve. And what happened as a result is that I gained a lot more respect and a lot more dialogue and a lot more like, oh, this guy like loves that he's Mormon and doesn't care at all. And it's unique and it's different and it's powerful. And it is in conversation. I remember one time I had my buddy who worked in film with me in high school. Like he sat me down before my mission. He's like, I just want you to know, I finally decided that you're a Christian, you know? And I'm just like, oh, thank you. Oh, wow. You know, like now that the great evangelical has, you know, he's like, well, you're like a Catholic, but like American Catholic, you have all these extra works. And like, I guess my point is like, what is this? What is this constantly simping for the, you know, for the Christian right to take whatever crumbs. And I think this goes back generations, like in as much as generational trauma exists, it is something that Latter-day Saints certainly would have about the violent past and the continued violent rhetoric about, yeah, that's nice that, you know, you guys got slaughtered, or, you know, we're so sorry you got slaughtered, but like, also just make sure you're not Christian and you are going to hell, you know? And not all Protestants or evangelicals feel this way. But I think, you know, and we can kind of get into this more specifically, but I think on the basis of thinking that we're political allies and sort of having such a long history of aligning on you know, moral and maybe philosophical issues that are not even totally consistent, some of them, with what our earlier history even was or is or was built around, that we are in this really uncomfortable and inaccurate understanding of our relationship to the rest of Christianity. And it would do us well to maybe do an inventory and be like, okay, what, you know, why does this matter so much that we're accepted by this particular group of Christians that is so particularly opposed to things that we want to be and aspire to.
Yeah, Jake, you know, you're talking about Flumen's book and looking through the history and how really more than just this is how it is a certain group hating another group, but it's actually defining who the Protestants are, right, to some degree. And it's interesting because you do have a framework, as you said, Barrett, before. You've got a framework here where Joseph Smith gets dropped into this time period where freedom of religion is still being tested. What is this exactly? How does it work? And you have 13 different colonies starting off, many of them with very different religions. Their religion is their politics, right? Their religion is their politics. So how do you make all of that work? They've got battles. You get rid of the original Articles of Confederation over all of this. You have eventually a constitution that's settled on in the 18th century. And it's just how is this eventually going to be coalesced around these principles that we believe are inspired and that do allow for Latter-day Saints to have the ability to grow and be a part of the American fabric, right? Now, if you look at the 13 colonies with these different religions, much of the framework of the Constitution and the founding documents actually do allow for these colonies and these different denominations to coalesce around these universal principles, right? But what it also does is it, as you get Joseph Smith coming in, you get, as you say, you define, you know, Protestants begin to define what they're not, and you have to do that. You do have to do that. I think that's part of a definition.
We do it. We do it.
We do it all the time. You have to do it, you know, but what it does is it almost says Mormonism is going to be the direction of the ire of all of these different denominations. And so it allows those denominations to actually unite against one single enemy, so to speak, one theological enemy with the Mormons, right? Would you say that, Jake, would you say that that Protestantism grows and is defined somewhat simply by saying, well, we're not them, and this is a line we're going to draw around us, which includes several of the denominations, And does that allow those denominations to pull themselves together into more of an idea of Christianity in America?
I mean, I think that historically that definitely appears to have been the case. That's how it played out in terms of, well, what are we? We're all of these different Protestant sects. We have all of these different theological differences. And especially later on in the 1800s and beyond, Flumen says this as much, like theology was downplayed in order to upplay a particular kind of identity. And for much of the 1800s, that was, we are absolutely not Catholics, Muslims, or Mormons. And by drawing the circle as to what counts as religion or not, or heresy or not, or ultimately, and this can't be avoided, I think, white American or not, especially when it comes to saying we're not Muslims.
That was a huge
We're not
part.
Asiatics, you know. And with the onset of polygamy in our religious practice, that becomes very important in terms of the stereotypes that were produced about Latter-day Saints. So there's like the Asiatic mongoloid monster with green skin and big lips. It's like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. This is awful. But it's drawing the circle. And then Jesus and John Wayne, with its flaws, but I think very robustly shows how those sentiments carried through into the 20th century and haven't really gone away.
Well, and that's also what a lot of that's also what a lot of like the identity of the Christian right is built around today. Like Jake and I were talking about this before getting on this interview, which is that we don't want to come off as politically motivated one way or the other. And just to show my cards, I'm very moderate, like I don't believe that, I guess what I'll say is that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the lens through which I view truth. I believe the gospel. I believe in the restored gospel. And I don't think an honest, objective reading of the gospel, and even of all of sort of the full history of the church and the full standard works and the scriptures, I don't think it gives Latter-day Saints a political home. I really don't. I think that, and most of us are comfortable talking about that and saying, yeah, both parties have. But like, to get really hyper specific, there are issues that are fundamentally Latter-day Saint issues that that the church itself, and I think a lot of members of the church, find themselves on either side of the aisle with. I think that's where you see this sort of LDS moderate conservative negotiation with what defines the Christian right, which is identity. It's identity politics. And this has been the case from the very beginning. If another great book is Religion of a Different Color, I think is what it's called. I don't have the name of the author right in front of me. I'll have to find it. But to Jake's point, like a huge part of all of our own racial history and issues and the priesthood ban, whatever it was, like culturally at least, grows out of the fact that the Eastern United States was obsessed with painting the Mormon, the exotic, Mormon, as some other race. It's like, you're not white, you're not American, because we're disgusted with the idea that you're part of us in any way. And of course, as a group of Latter-day Saints whose grandparents had fought in the Revolutionary War and who had appealed to the United States to be protected on the basis of their religion, were appalled by this, and they felt like, well, the U.S. has abandoned us, but we love the Constitution and we love these principles and we're going to follow our God. And so like that history, there's no way that that's not relevant all the way up until today, when there are still kind of these instincts and these kind of this strain of what is the gate, not just on an ideological basis, but on like who, and sort of conflating those things. I think you're right, Greg, when you say it's about theology, but I think theology informs our views of identity. and I have found a lot more, I have experienced, at least personally, a lot more comments of like, well, you're one of the good ones. I think you believe in Jesus, and I'll decide kind of that, but your church though. And it's like, our church is a fundamental part of our theology.
Uh-oh,
Greg, I think you're
muted.
So that brings us to a couple of other points. The argument, and I've spoken to very smart people about this, and they come from different angles on this, but the argument about being Christian, or putting a label of being Christian on being a Latter-day Saint, and an identity, again, there's a label of identity being placed, many want to be placed on themselves as Latter-day Saints. A few say no, that I've spoken to. But where do you see that? Where does that term, if we talk about this coalescing around, not being Muslim, not being Catholic, not being Mormon, and this bringing together of these, uniting of these other Christian denominations, where does that argument land today about being Christian and how that was probably developed really in the 19th century?
If I may really briefly, I know that you have some thoughts on this, Barrett. There's something in the sort of, I guess, the philosophy of language. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein has this phrase that the meaning of a word is its use in language. And that it's one of those phrases where it's like, okay, thanks, Sherlock.
Yeah,
that is what a word means, isn't it? But you take a step back and you think about it. It's like, well, what is the use of Christian in the English language, specifically in the Anglophone Americas? Mm-hmm. And is it specifically creedal Christianity? Is that how it's used? Whether or not what we want it to mean, whether or not the denotation even in the dictionary says, believer, follower of Jesus Christ, or whatever it says, is how it's used against including Latter-day Saints in the majority usage of the word. I hope that makes sense, but it's something that we need to grapple with, that maybe in the way that the majority English-speaking America uses Christian, that we're not. And we can say, yes, we are in these ways, but we have to be willing to concede that's not how most people use the term Christian. And then we have to be okay with that and say, I'm okay with my identity, because what you mean by Christian is something different. And I don't follow the creeds. I don't follow the Creed of Nicaea and Athanasius or whatever. So anyways, Barry.
Well, here's my argument against that.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked about this a few times. It's not just being a creedal, someone who believes in the creeds, right? There's an automatic assumption, whether you're religious or not religious in the United States, that if someone says you're Christian, you believe in Jesus Christ as your Savior and Redeemer, that He is the one who has given you the opportunity to, we'll say, go to heaven, right? By believing Him and believing in His sacrifice. And you can't untie that in the United States, the way it's used. I don't think you can untie the creeds from that idea of Jesus Christ as my Savior, right? I think they are both pregnant in that definition. And so for me to parse that out, what I always use is creedal Christian or non-creedal Christian, because then I can get rid of one of those two and change it to some degree. And I believe it works as perfectly as anything does out there. Okay. And so I say I am a non-creedal Christian. Now I want to go back to the idea of, the other thing is missionary work. If there is a full on, if as long as I think others think, well, they say they're Christian, right? Then there's still at least the thought, okay, they believe in Jesus Christ. A lot of people don't even know that. They don't understand it. I've had unbelievably ignorant comments on my videos from people saying, you don't even believe Jesus is your Savior. You don't even believe that Jesus died and was resurrected. Right? It's that there is a high level of ignorance to our theology and what we believe in. And so Christian does represent that still. And to the point we were talking about before, Barrett, where you said, Christian is usually used in the scriptures as the enemies identifying
at least in the
those
book
people.
of
So I would say the following, and you brought up the word disciples, which I like.
Yeah.
But we take on the name of Christ when we get baptized.
Yes, for sure.
We take on the name of Christ. I think that's different than just saying we're a disciple. Right? What am I called by then? What is, if I take on the name of Christ, the best word we have, I believe, is Christian. Mm-hmm. for stating that we take on the name of Christ. Now, again, there's so much that goes into this. It is very difficult and nuanced. I get it, because I want to push back on not being a part of what mainstream Christianity is.
I think these are phenomenal points, Greg. And I want to state clearly here too. And I know I speak for both me and Jake, like we believe we're Christians, we identify as Christian. I would very proudly call myself a Christian. But I think to Jake's point about how a word is used has just as much effect. I have a couple points of pushback, if I may, Greg. The first is that, like, how do you believe in the Trinity?
No.
Why?
Because it's not true.
Why don't you just call the Godhead the Trinity? That's a perfectly good Christian word. Why don't we use the term Trinity?
But because the Trinity is a very specific theological concept.
Right. We use Godhead instead of Trinity, even though in Spanish or in Portuguese or in many other countries where the differentiation is not as much of a cultural issue. We use Trinidad, right? Trinity. It's the same word. It means Godhead. It means Trinity. And all we have to do is kind of identify and parse out, right? And yet in the United States, it comes with some really specific expectations. And in English, it's, we conflate these things. And so, like, in sort of the philosophy of language, like, these things matter. When it comes to missionary work, if we want to help people understand that we follow Jesus Christ, I don't know that big branded terms are what convince people that we follow Jesus Christ. It certainly wasn't in my relationships with my friends in high school. It was observing my behavior and my values and my testimony of Jesus, which I would share and make very clear. And the Lord himself didn't say, "By this shall men know ye are my disciples." If you use the word Christian, they're really going to know you're my disciples at that point, right? He said, if you love one another, and it's how you express yourself. So while I'm not necessarily suggesting that, like, we say, no, we're not Christian, I just think that some of what I think that sometimes, forgive me if I'm wrong here, it's just my opinion, but, like, I think we conflate theology and identity and sort of the need to assimilate, and we conflate all of these things, right? We've got our history of theology and doctrine. We also have our history of persecution and assimilation for the need for survival. And so, like, yes, absolutely. If we need to make it clear, and I don't know that we have the answers for this. I have a proposal, but of course it's just for me. Like, this is more of a comment on us as a community, but I'm just not sure those things are as distinct as we'd like them to be. How do we take the name of Christ upon us? Is it through the term Christian? I don't know. But what I can tell you is that at least today in the 21st century in 2025, when somebody thinks Christian who isn't Christian, I think they think a whole lot of things that are not necessarily what we are as Latter-day Saints.
Jake, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that Mormon introduces himself as, "I am Mormon and I am a disciple of Christ." And I think that is a powerful thing, that, like, if somebody says we're not a Christian, we can say, "Okay, but I'm a disciple of Christ." And it's like, "Oh, that's a word game." It's like, yeah, it is a word game. It's really annoying, isn't it? So either stop or don't, but it's irrelevant to who I am, which is a follower of Christ, a disciple of Christ. And I'm going to continue saying that I'm a Christian to people. It's not like I'm saying I'm going to stop using that word in the context that makes sense for me as a Christian, as a disciple of Christ. It's more to say, don't take it seriously when someone like Mark Driscoll, who has like $200,000 of fraud allegations and like bizarre hypersexual sermons, when he says we're not Christians, like, go away. Enough. I'm a disciple of Christ.
And it gives them the power as we're constantly trying to negotiate with the evangelical or the Protestant or the creedal Christian as to why we're the same. They already don't think we're the same. We're asking for permission to be let into a, as far as missionary work goes, I think it's very easy to show that you follow Jesus Christ. As far as convincing another Christian why we're the same, we're not the same. We are different. We're an expressly different variation of Christianity. We're a restoration strain of theology. We believe that we have access to all truth, that we have claim on the whole of Christendom. We don't need their approval to understand that we have claim anywhere. Brigham Young talked about, like, if there's truth in heaven or hell or anywhere, it belongs to the Latter-day Saints. And one of the very first things, this is a paradox, right? We believe all things, we hope all things, we see validity in every expression of religion, and yet at the same time, one of the first things the Lord himself said is that all their creeds are an abomination. I don't know that we need to apologize for the Lord and for the foundations of what our entire theology is. And when we also are able to accept what those boundaries are and what they are not, I think that it robs the bully of his power, right? Of that we're somehow sneaking around trying to gain access to the legitimacy of the coalition of what what defines this group of people by what they're not, which is in so much part us, not exclusively us. I have one more point to make on this. When it comes to Islam, or when it comes to followers of Krishna, or when it comes to some of the Eastern religions like Shinto, or like the history of Zoroastrianism, I think it's really valuable that a Latter-day Saint can look through all of those and see similarities in our own faith tradition, which clearly suggests that it all comes from a common source. And we have no problem with that, right? We don't have to die on the hill that, Islam is somehow the devil's, variation on the truth. That is very possible within our faith, that this was an expression of the gospel that went into apostasy, like any other version. And for some reason, I think we give Christianity on the whole more credit because they have the name of Christ, because they have the New Testament. When you have these other religious traditions that are doing a lot of the same things that we are, that might be missing the plain and precious truths, but have other truths that are there. And I don't think that just because someone is a fellow Christian makes them necessarily closer to the fullness of the gospel, because not all who say unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven. But he that doeth the works of my Father, right? Like there's something to this. There's something to the fact that in some sense, we have more in common with a lot of the religious traditions we're less familiar with, because we are hyper fixating on our Protestant and Catholic brothers and sisters who we love and want to have good relationships with, but don't need their kind of pat on the head for legitimacy.
Yeah, I guess I would question that hyper fixation. I don't know if that's true. If we actually do hyper fixate on them, I think we are very internal in terms of identity. I do know that a lot of people do. Okay, they do look for the acceptance, and maybe Christian is the term they are most looking for in terms of acceptance. A lot of that goes back again to the DNA of the history of persecution and generational trauma, so to speak, theological trauma.
Sure.
But it's kind of like, okay, so like England, right? Well, here's a question. Is Israel part of the West?
Is that a rhetorical question? Or
Yeah.
I don't know.
Is Israel part of, are they a democracy?
I mean, that's a really good question.
Okay. So again, it's like, wait a minute, they're very different.
Sure.
But the way the term is used, democracy,
right.
Western values.
Sure. Yeah.
There's an awful lot of that a lot of people can say, okay, well, Israel is part of the West in that term. They're part of.
I see what you mean.
They're part of, because that's how we use the term.
Yes.
Right? Is they're using it. Is England part of that? I mean, they use a parliamentary form of of democracy. Mm-hmm. Is that the West? Is that democracy? It's, I don't know. Again, this is getting into some semantics here. But
I mean, you're right to ask that, and perhaps it is too bold of a stance to suggest that we're hyper fixated on that specifically. But I certainly don't think there is any lack of our focus on needing to be really clear on who we are and what we are. And I stand by that. I'm glad that we're using the full name of the church. I'm glad that we're identifying more clearly as Latter-day Saints, a part of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Mm-hmm. I think it's significant that President Nelson talked about how our, how we should identify is first as a child of God, then as a child of the covenant, then as a disciple of Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. Pretty interesting that our a child of the covenant essentially as a Latter-day Saint, and then as a disciple of Jesus Christ. That those, I
think that's very strategic.
Those things matter, right? Mm-hmm. And you use the word strategic. I want to be very careful here. I don't want this to come, to sound like a criticism, especially of maybe the current focus of the church. But when taken on the whole, I don't think it's inaccurate to say we have a hyperfixation on how we're perceived and how we're understood, and that we are followers of Jesus Christ. And yes, theologically, that's essential, that's important, and also serves a political and social function when it comes to this lopsided Stockholm syndrome power dynamic that we have with the rest of the Christians.
So Jake, let me ask you, are we hyper-fixated on our own identity in terms of acceptance, or are we hyper-fixated on our identity to the world because there is so much misinformation about who we are and what the world perceives us to be as an identity?
That is a really good question. I mean, I think like so many things, it's probably both. But maybe let's separate it a little bit, because I think there is the general desire to be perceived well by just people in general, as an individual, as a community, and obviously Latter-day Saints have that because that's a human attribute. And I think on top of that, and I think this is difficult to get across without going too much into politics, that there is absolutely a desire to be on the Christian right. And that's not to say that you can't be a Republican as a Latter-day Saint. That's not to say that you can't be a Democrat as a Latter-day Saint. This isn't a political judgment. This is a political observation to say that there is this thing called the Christian right, and it is a real identity group. And we can play the political game and say we're going to vote with them or not without saying we are a part of them. Because to say that we are a part of the Christian right comes along with a lot of baggage. And we can vote with them without saying that we are them. Because here's the thing, and maybe this is slightly tinfoil hat, but these are the same people, culturally speaking, who would turn around and stab our backs the moment they got the chance for the past 190 years. And maybe we should take that into consideration with our political identity, not our political affiliation. That's fine. But our political identity, And I do think that we have a little bit of a hyperfixation as a culture. And like the whole church, the masses of the church in the early 1900s, they voted Democrat, and the church leaders tried to get them to vote Republican, and they wouldn't do it. And it took a long time of very dedicated efforts to say, no, we're going to do this. These are the people who we align with. And this is not, again, to keep the tribal hackles from coming up, this is not to say, don't vote Republican. I vote Republican, okay? This is an identity issue. Who do we align with in terms of who we want to be like? We should want to be like our own best selves and like Christ.
Well, and you know, Greg, you said a portion of them. I think the question is like, how big is the portion? You know, and I don't mean that every one of our friends who is Protestant or evangelical is like, don't trust them. You know, it's that we all know that everybody has a Sunday school lesson on the Mormons, and that like this is foundational, and that I think to Jake's point, like whether or not they're like, yeah, get them now, we are sometimes upholding a group that very much is not interested in Latter-day Saints being a part of that group, but will happily use us if it, and this has been true from the very beginning. This is why the church leaders wanted Latter-day Saints to be Republican, was to protect them. And after the Republicans annihilated us on plural marriage, then we went to them and said, hey, you know, what if we were to vote with you? Will you stop coming after us now? It's like, oh, okay, yeah, we could do that. And so like, how big is the portion? I don't know. As far as misinformation goes, yes, there's misinformation about the church. And also there is information that is accurate that just needs context, that we're a bit sheepish about, that we don't want to talk about. We know this, right? We've talked about some of these things. And so we have this conflation of like, well, is it positive? Does it make us look good? Does it make us look normal? Is it misinformation? Is it false? And all those things stir around how we are perceived in media, how we see ourselves being represented. And I think Jake is wise to parse these things out because they're all individual, separate issues.
You know, I've had a couple of discussions with some evangelicals since the Michigan attack, and that is something that I push back on. Also, I just say, you know, be careful, because you don't know. You know, again, I am convinced thoroughly that attack comes from a fueling of anti-Mormon rhetoric, vitriolic, hateful, violent rhetoric that is found online, and people go down that rabbit hole and they get radicalized, right? And most of that comes from the right. Most of it comes from the right. And so it's, you know, my point on that is saying, hey, just let's curb some of this in terms of politics and identity, because let's just think about this for a second. If the left was, let's say the left was conquered, which is never going to happen, but let's say the left was conquered, where would we stand with the religious right?
There you go. That's kind of
that is, we are, just like we were saying about the alignment and the coalescing around principles and against the Latter-day Saints early on. Where would, you know, that align them? Well, we do align politically more with the religious right than we do with the left, the secular left, right? But we are not a part of them. We are not a part of them, and you can't think that way. And I love what you said, Barrett, about for example, and this is again now, Jake, I'm taking on your hat here and saying, I am politically, I'm independent in terms of party affiliation, because I do not want the identity or the label that has so much involved with it to be a part of, oh, I'm lockstep with this, right? I'm a part of this, because the party that I affiliate with is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's my political party.
Same.
Right. And so I'm going to look through things. Now I'm going to disagree with others who might say the same thing on solutions, on where we're at, where things are going, worldview, even, you know, et cetera. But I have an issue with, you know, we're talking about the idea of a Christian identity, using that term. I don't want a political party identity. I don't want to be a part of that. Right? Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
100%. Well, and I don't know that in today's world, I don't know that it's ever been this way in the American history, because I love how Christian the founding principles were and agree with that. But let's just say now, Greg, I don't think those things can be totally separated,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we're seeing more and more. I mean, Jake was telling me a little bit more, and you could speak more to this about this, Jake, on Jesus and John Wayne. But like, there is a sort of, religious, political, like socio-political marriage of those things. Frankly, there is for us too. There is for Latter-day Saints, right? We can't pretend that the Council of 50 wasn't a thing. We can't pretend that we don't believe that the stone cut out of the mountain without hands will fill the whole world. And of course, our other fellow Christian friends would say the same thing, but they would think something entirely different. And who they decide is a prophet might expressly be different. And you make the point that like we find ourselves on the right. I think that for some issues we do. For some issues, as you have made a very strong case for, Greg, like on some issues, they're fundamental issues. But on other issues, we see Latter-day Saints turning on the church on the basis of right-wing ideas that they inherited from the right wing, not from the church. The church is very, let's say, more left-leaning on issues like immigration. All the people that turned on the church because a doctor, had the gall to say that he thought vaccines were inspired of God. And all of a sudden it's like, well, how could he say that? When has the church ever had the right to talk about a health code? And I think my point is that, like, early on, even in our history, we were stronger when we were a voting bloc that could go one way or the other. We were stronger when we knew what we were. And sadly, honestly, that is what led to some of the violence against us, because it's like, these darn Mormons need to be put in their place. They are too powerful if they can go one way or the other. And I don't know. I mean,
I think the problem is, as you're bringing this up, I think the issue is more a lot of people say, and even the church says, well, we got to separate politics from church. Church and politics, church and state, whatever. We're going to separate all these things. You can't do that. I don't believe that is a possibility. The most political book on earth is the Book of Mormon. I think it is full of politics. It is full of identity. It is full of conflict and how are we going to hold this together? How do we hold this nation together? How do we fight against our enemies? It is war. It is theology. It is politics. It is defending our wives, our children, our land, our liberty, our religion, and our God. Right? It's a very political book, and I think that it has to be, because even in today's, we're finding more and more that our own core beliefs, and I think it's going to go further to the core, are political. The Family Proclamation has become a very political document, because ultimately, at a fundamental level, those issues are political.
But not partisan. They're political.
But not partisan. Well, they lean toward maybe one party, but or one ideology, but other things don't. Right? Other things don't.
Jake, you had
something to say about this separation of church and state that I think often gets set aside. Is like, what does that mean? It's a legal term. It's establishmentarianism, that the state has a state religion, like England has the Church of England. Yeah, exactly. And so, if you are in England, you must attend the Anglican Church. That is the union of church and state. To separate church and state is to say these are two separate bodies.
There's two of those, by the way, as of yesterday.
We have a democratically elected government. We have a church or other churches. It doesn't necessarily matter. Over here, they can influence each other in terms of values, because that is impossible for someone to say, I am going to go into government and completely set aside my religious convictions. That doesn't make any sense. And I think when people I've heard this from people on the Christian right, say that, oh, Mormons are unable to separate church and state. They want a theodemocracy. They're bringing their Mormon principles into government. It's not separating church and state. It's like, what are you talking about? That's not what that term means. So anyways, I just wanted to get that out there.
Well, that's all anybody does. And if you're religious at all, you're going to bring that religion into your politics. It's
and that's, I mean, religious is a term we again abuse. It's like moral, ethical, but, you know, belief. Do we want politicians who don't believe anything, who are willing to just be opportunists and sort of play the part for whoever uses them? I don't think so. You know, moral convictions upset people and they turn people. And I'm sure that in our conversation about this, Jake and I are going to get pushback, or people, you know, suspicious of like, what's the agenda here? And like, I can be really clear. The agenda is like, we need to do an evaluation on the basis of culture and identity and spirituality. Like, you're 100% right, Greg, that like everything is political, and the scriptures. In fact, Jake was teaching me about some of this before our interview. You have some really good quotes I think you should share, Jake, from Peculiar People on this basis, on the political threat that the Latter-day Saints posed.
Yeah, I do have a quote that's kind of interesting. So this is Stephen Douglas, the Illinois senator, I think is what he was. He beat Abraham Lincoln for the senator position. So speaking in Illinois in 1857, Stephen Douglas presented himself as having been duped by the Mormons. Who could have known that the Mormons would be guilty of anything other than religious peculiarities? Given the field reports, Stephen continued, it seemed that the inhabitants of Utah as a community are outlaws and alien enemies, unfit to exercise the right of self-government. Congress should apply the knife and cut this loathsome, disgusting ulcer. So that's just one quote of many of how Latter-day Saints, in their political potential, posed a very real threat to both sides of the American two-party system. And this admittedly is in part because we did try and play both sides very actively early on in our history to see who would give us favors, because we knew that people hated us.
Well, because we were getting mobbed. We were getting
mobbed, and our property destroyed and stolen, and our women were being raped, and all this stuff. Pre-polygamy. This is in Ohio, and this is in Missouri, and this is in Illinois. So why not try and play both sides? Of course, that's unwise in some ways, and it definitely blew up in the proverbial our faces. But it's a very old and storied tradition to be very concerned about the political power of Latter-day Saints.
Do you think that I know a lot of people that are very politically involved. I can't quite go to that level, even though I oftentimes support them in the issues that they're focused on, right? It's like there's certain issues I may focus on those as well, in terms of at least speaking about them. I just can't. I can't invest that far for myself usually, which is why on this show I don't talk about party politics. I don't talk about candidates unless it's a different topic, right? There's no support there for any of them. I don't. How political? See, I believe we have to be very political, but I think we have to be really careful about again, I think we have to be very political about our own identity. Very careful about our political identity.
Sure.
In terms of what we represent. Right. And by the way, I also say, I will say with a caveat, I don't, if I'm saying I'm part of the party of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I may not agree.
Right.
With what the church leaders might even say on a political side. And I know that they would say, vote your conscience, or the way the church sometimes would land on an issue. right? I may not agree with it. I think that's okay. To me, that's okay. I'm going to vote my conscience, and I'm going to vote.
Certainly hope it's okay.
The moral issue. What did you say, Jake?
Very bad for everybody, the church, if that wasn't okay.
Because I don't, I have to do what I have. Ultimately, I have a responsibility over my own person and my family above all things, right? I think that's the way I look at it. And I'm going to vote my conscience on those things. What do you say to that?
Well, at least my thoughts are that that's a Latter-day Saint value and virtue. And like, part of the reason I don't love how much we've, culturally drifted to just one side is I don't think it's consistent with what our actual doctrinal values are, which are more a mixed bag. I think there is power and beauty in moderation and the idea that, of compromise, and that kind of in our more holistic view of truth being circumscribed from all places into a great whole. Like for me personally, that must account for opposing views. Joseph Smith said that, by proving contraries is truth made manifest, and so that there's dialogue. And early Latter-day Saints, that was some of the ideas that that the millennium even would be full of rich, diverse views and opinions, including political. And I don't think people should tear themselves up about, policies they may find on themselves on one, one side or the other, even in opposition to maybe what the church standard is. I think this is, Jake and I talked about this. We didn't want to drift too far into politics just because it's on the basis of theology and religion and identity, but those things are not, they can't be separated. And so that would be my thought, is just like, in as much as a political identity and a sort of myopic coalition is concerned, I think it would just do us all some good to understand exactly where we fit, exactly who we are, what our values actually are on a doctrinal basis, then decide whether we, kind of come to a reckoning with those things. I wish we had the People's Party again, like the Latter-day Saint Party. That's like, hey, this is kind of what we think and believe, at least in terms of how our interests go. I mean, you've seen this, Greg. You've seen strains of apostasy that are coming from both like ideological and politically motivated places. I'm going to, make a little hot take here. The polygamy denier movement is completely politically motivated. 1000%. It hijacks an existential fear that it doesn't understand because people don't know their history. They're obsessed with Nauvoo. They're obsessed with Joseph Smith instead of knowing the entire breadth of plural marriage. And they marry it with these assumptions that happen to conveniently match some libertarian ideas, some kind of conspiratorial ideas, and it's political. And we wouldn't see this kind of schisming if we had a better understanding of who we are, what our past is, what our values are, at least institutionally, and then kind of coming to terms with those things. So I hope that's not too bold, but that's my feeling on it. And
it's very political, and you can see it also in where it's moving to, because it's very much anti-church eventually. It just gets there. And I know there are a lot of people that believe that, but they don't believe in the movement, but are faithful members of the church. I get it. But you're going to see more and more, as we've seen recently. You've got a marriage between the Doctrine of Christ people and even Tim Ballard now. And, where it's, you've got this group coming together now, and it's like, this is not new. This is the same stuff that happened with the schisms in the church when Brigham Young came along. It's the exact same thing, the same arguments, exactly the same thing.
And if Tim Ballard is this hyper right wing, the deep state is everywhere, it's in the church, and thereby turns on the church when it doesn't like him doing the things that are immoral that he thinks he can do. This is why these things matter, because if he can appeal to your values, if you happen to align on this sort of political identitarianism with him, then it is no different from some hyper secular, extremely woke ex-Mormon appealing to your values on something that it's like, man, the church really is pretty dang problematic, isn't it? I think it's toxic and it's patriarchal and and all of a sudden you're creating this phantom church, and who pays for it? The Latter-day Saints. Every time. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints pays for it.
Well, it's the woke right. It's what you can call it now. It's the woke right doing the exact same thing. It's anti-authoritarian. It does exactly the same kind of patriarchal power. They just call it something different.
That's right.
So,
it is.
It's same issues going on. So back to Driscoll and what's going on oftentimes in the evangelical world.
Driscoll.
Where do we stand with all of this? Is it ever going to end? What about bridge building? And, the examples I give of the woman at the well, right? And working with that example. And I mean, that worked. Right. The woman at the well, the example of the woman at the well, that worked. It was he actually treated that as if, okay, you're a Samaritan, but
yes,
she's looking for the Messiah.
Yes.
Right. There's enough there to, there obviously missionary work, but it's not just missionary work. It's a commonality that is worked with. And where do we stand with this? Is it ever going to end? And what do we do about it?
Yeah, it's a great question, because it's like, has it ever ended between any of the great or small religious sects? It's one of those things where religion is so deeply tied into identity and values, the things that we bring into the world to say this is right or wrong, this is worth more, this is worth less. It's all mixed up. And to say that we will all just take each other at face value and love each other, everybody will love each other and respect each other's beliefs, I don't think that can ever really happen, just because of human nature and our desire, not even desire, our impulse to form tribes and say what we are not. And so as long as the human race is still doing that, we will see tension. However, that is not to say that we cannot build just massive 6-lane highway bridges to communicate and show service and love and admiration and even holy envy between the different Christian sects, between the different world religions, between cultures and ethnicities and all of these things. I think that's what circumscribing all truth into one great whole is it's not just finding what is scientifically correct, finding what is doctrinally correct within our church. Bingo, there you go. I think it's taking the entirety of the human experience and bringing the gift of discernment to bear upon it, and seeing what aligns, seeing what doesn't, but what is still beautiful, and taking it into ourselves and taking it into ourselves as a church.
That's unique to Latter-day Saints.
It is.
It is
very unique to Latter-day Saints. Let me say this. Barrett, you've got this is again going to go to theology, right? You've got a worldview of the majority of Christians where the thought is, okay, if you don't accept Jesus the way I think you should accept Jesus, you are damned to hell. All right. So think about that worldview for a second. I think Latter-day Saints don't understand it. They don't get this. It's like, look, what does that say that if you don't accept Jesus the way I do it, the way I'm presenting it to you right now, and you won't accept that, what do I now think of you? And I'll go this far, and please, I've got a lot of evangelical friends, but I would ask them the same question. What does that mean in terms of what you think of me? In my eternal value? to God and to others. If I am doomed to burn in hell because I don't accept Jesus the way you accept Jesus, and to be with some red creature with horns and a spiked tail forever as a demon, basically, what value do I have? What value am I really? Is that going to be different than what you were just bringing up, Jake, in terms of a worldview that says all truth is circumcised into one whole, one eternal round, right? It's what is the difference there? Does that theological divide create a worldview that is going to show the manifestation of those two sides of the coin?
That's what the word Christian means to a lot of people, by the way.
Sure.
Jake, you had a thought.
I apologize. I just don't want to forget it. But this is something that I thought the other day. I think I mentioned this to you, Barrett. But it's this really, I think there is real tangible implications of these different doctrines of salvation between most creedal Christians and Latter-day Saints, where for a Christian to be saved is to, profess Christ or to be baptized, depending on if you still believe in ordinances or not. And then like you ascend into heaven after you die. Those who are on essentially the wrong team go down to heaven or go down to hell. It is ultimately very tribal. And there is so much beautiful stuff out there in all the different Christian sects of like, what is heaven going to be like? And like, are the boundaries permeable? And there's all this exegesis. But when it comes down to the rank and file of I think, as I see it, the Protestant Christian America, it is either you go to heaven or you go to hell. And that comes down to being on the right team. And once you're there, I don't know.
I mean, it gives
God. It's just like, we'll see. You're one of the spirit creations of God. You get to be in his presence. You get to bask forever. And so you chose right. You were on the right team. What do Latter-day Saints believe? We believe in something like eternal progression. We believe in degrees of glory that, I don't know, some even church leaders have said that there's progression between the levels of glory after death. I don't know whether or not that's true, but that's kind of beside the point. But regardless, it's a working heaven. It is a progressing heaven. You're becoming more like God. You're becoming better all the time. You're involved in the process of creation. This whole thing of like, I get my own planet when I die. Like, that's such a goofy misconstrual of what it means, at least as far as I understand it, which is like you get to participate in the generation of new life and new worlds forever. Whatever that process looks like that is a very different vision than just being in the imminent presence of God. And I think that is what we see here with the like, you're going to hell versus like, we'll see. That's the ultimate thing for Latter-day Saints is like, we'll see what happens after life, where you fall in, because everybody gets a shot and we're all progressing upwards so long as we continue to choose to do so.
Barrett, does that play into politics? Today's politics?
1,000,000% it does. I mean, Latter-day Saints are become, in my view, more generous, more humble, more moderate, more open-minded, while maintaining the boundaries of the covenant when they better understand their theology. I don't want to misrepresent evangelicals or Protestants or Catholics, and there are variations and degrees of the kind of the binary of heaven and hell.
A lot of them.
And some people interpret that sort of binary of heaven and hell with a sense of urgency and Christian compassion. That it's like, I have to do this ministry, and like I'm saving you from the octopus of Mormonism, as they used to kind of portray it. It's like you poor like Christian thing that got corrupted by Joseph Smith, and so I don't I don't want to be and nor do I think your portrayal of it was, Jake, but just I want to be clear for any of our Christian friends who might listen to this interview, is like, I don't want to misportray or be reductive the same way that we don't like that to happen. I know that some people believe that that's sort of what's handed to them, It's like, well, this is the, you know, kind of the demands of a just God. And in his mercy, he sent Jesus Christ, and there's only the one way. And the theology is not robust enough or full enough to account for the infidel, to account for the person who's never heard of Jesus Christ. Where I think it does get political is because we essentially have a universalist theology. You know, we really focus on the celestial kingdom and an exaltation, but like to some extent, everyone's going to heaven. They're going to a heaven. They may suffer for their own sins. They may miss out on the progression or the glory, but Joseph Smith talked about the celestial kingdom and who would go there and what it would mean. I think it makes it easier to understand that we're all of God's children and that he has a plan of salvation for all of us that basically solves the paradox of both the one way, you know, the exact way, and the circumscription of truth and accounting for all truth. And I think that when you believe that someone is hellbound, and when you especially believe that they're hellbound on the basis of those rotten things they think that you don't like, it is much, much easier to dismiss them as a person and to essentially guard, you know, kind of gatekeep of who's in and who's out, because that's a black and white. Now,
and that applies to dialogue between the faiths.
Yes. Now, I want to be really clear on something, Greg, answering your earlier thought. I've spoken really like with a lot of passion about this. I don't want to give the impression that we ought to just, you know, stop talking to, you know, other sects of Christianity. Or I have a chart. It's from a website called usefulcharts.com. That's a whole chart of the of sort of the progression of Christianity and all the different sects and breakoffs. And they're so interesting and they're beautiful. And we have a lot to learn from them. I think Latter-day Saints would do better to learn more about what other Christians actually believe and what the difference is between a Presbyterian and a Methodist and an evangelical and a non-denominational and a Catholic and an Orthodox, and the first among equals versus the Bishop of Rome. Like if you can't speak with some education to what another Christian is or believes, or what their own disputes are about the sacraments, or whether baptism is really needed for salvation, then we have work to do on our side, and we can understand better why they think what they do about us. You've done a lot of great interfaith work, Greg, and I've studied a lot of interfaith work, especially here in East Tennessee, and kind of looked into what's effective. And one of the things that experts in really productive interfaith work suggest is that the natural tendency is to want to just really hyperfixate on the commonalities. It's like, oh, hey, did you know Eastern Orthodox, they believe that in a sort of apotheosis that, man will be like God. And did you know that Eastern Orthodox focus on the resurrection instead of the crucifixion, and that there's all these commonalities? The commonalities are really important, but to have a healthy, a relationship of mutual respect, you also have to focus on the differences and the boundaries. I think that's some of what I think you've done a really nice job of with Hello Saints and Pastor Jeff. Like, there is a great relationship there because you relate to each other, because you understand each other. And like, hey, we're on different kind of planes here of what we think, but here's what's alike and here's what's different. I don't know. I think that Latter-day Saints could lead the world in interfaith work because of our unique beliefs about truth being in everything. And here's the kicker. I don't think that we need to be more invested in interfaith relationships with other Christians than we do with other religions generally, who also believe in God. I mean, here's a rhetorical question for both you and the audience. It's like, is it more important to align with another Christian than it is with a Muslim, or someone who's Jewish, or somebody who's a follower of Krishna, or somebody who believes in any number of a Buddhist or any number of beliefs? I don't think so. I think they're all expressions of the same thing. and that one of our unique beliefs is that we have the fullness of the everlasting gospel, and that all of these children have received a portion of God's light. Ergo, it's just as important to minister to and do interfaith work with a non-Christian as it is with our Christian brothers and sisters.
Yeah, well, there's no difference in value. That's one of the main theological points. We don't see a difference in, number one, identity. You're a child of God.
Right.
Right. And so that really does make a difference. Now, on the point of communication and the theology and the worldview, the point of salvation, there's 2 points I would make. One is we do have a way. I mean, Jesus is the truth, the light, and the way, right? There's a specific way. The difference is we apply that to exaltation, right? That is exaltation. And we could kind of look at that like maybe the way they apply it to the general idea of heaven. The problem with that theology that we see with most of Christianity is that if that divide then is, well, you haven't followed all of the things you're supposed to do, or you haven't accepted Jesus the way you're supposed to accept him, again, you're doomed. And there's so many implications to that in terms of the value of the person, in terms of the love of God.
Right.
Right. That changes the nature of everything. It changes the nature of existence. It changes the nature of future. It changes the nature of God. It changes a worldview. There's so many changes that would go along with that. Is that also, I would say, for example, a Driscoll, I'll bring him up again, that worldview, that theology, a basis for the rhetoric that is often what we receive. Jake?
I think that it certainly appears to be united, at least in the sense of such extreme tribalism. I mean, I know this has probably happened to you, Barrett, probably you too, Greg, but certainly to me, and even like young mom in my ward who bore testimony where some frustrating encounter happens with often evangelicals or other Protestant or Catholic Christian, where they feel the need, like just in the park or sitting at dinner, to remind you that you're going to hell. It's like, why does this keep happening? Why is this such an integral part of so many people's expression of their faith, is to remind them, oh, well, you're going to hell? Because in their soteriology, their doctrine of salvation, that matters so much, that you are professing Christ in the right way, or that you are in the right sect, or that you're just in the greater Christian umbrella writ large, that I really don't think that it comes from a place of hatred. I think that oftentimes it does come from a place of care and concern, but the outward expression, aside from being abrasive, lends itself towards dehumanization, I think. And that is a very big problem. And I think that it's something we have to keep our eyes out for as Latter-day Saints.
Well, and it's not that we don't believe that Christ is the only way. We do. But we also believe that Christ and the Father have prepared a way. And that includes posthumous ordinances, that our theology of judgment seems to be, the Book of Mormon talks about the final judgment, and there are kind of judgments along the way, but that the Lord's going to do everything he can to give you every opportunity to repent, even if you've had opportunities. It's like, well, there's the millennium to account for, and there's the spirit world, and that's another paradox, right? It's like, that's not to say to procrastinate the day of your repentance. I don't want to sound like, every faith expression willy-nilly is just gonna, cut the mustard in terms of Jesus Christ being the way, the truth, and the light. However, it is Jesus himself that kind of, well, one, teaches some of this in the New Testament, but even more so accounts for through Latter-day Saint theology, that he'll hunt you down and save you. He wants you there with him, and he does not judge people according to their knowledge and understanding. He's not going to judge them harshly if they believe they were doing the right thing according to the tradition that was handed to them, and that probably has some light and truth well, certainly has light and truth, and may even have some little nuances that we're missing. Like, we have the fullness of the ordinances and the gospel, but Jake mentioned a term earlier, holy envy. And I learned that term from Alonzo Gaskill at BYU. It is the, in fact, I have the book over there somewhere, if I, sitting on my shelf, about, there's a BYU class that's world religions. And our approach is to, like, what did they have that we can claim, that we can admire, because that's part of what Mormonism is. It's a claim on all truth. It's like where it lands, it belongs with us. I don't know that we culturally live that way. I don't think that's how we express the restored gospel, but that is what the doctrine is. And so, you know, whereas Jake's experience, or this girl in his ward might, and all of us have had it, somebody sitting there well-meaning, it's eating at them, right? It's like, I gotta tell them, you know, as I'm watching my food cook, I'm like, they're gonna cook in hell. A Latter-day Saint might ask questions and learn about what someone else believes. And as Joseph Smith to President Hinckley said, take the truth you have and let us add to it. You know, that informs every part of politics. That informs every part of how you see children of God. I think it's why the church is not as harsh on immigration. I think it's why the church is not as harsh on refugees, because we were there. That's been us. And they're children of God, and policies are policies. And yes, they're important, but the vitriol that suddenly accompanies these issues has to come in some part from theology. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's finish on this. We've talked a little bit about the DNA of America, of religion in America, of the othering of where Latter-day Saints have been in the past. Is that going to change at all in the future? And how should we see ourselves moving forward? And why is it important to see ourselves in a certain light moving forward?
I think my answer to that is relatively simple, which is let's change it. Let's make it happen, each of us in our individual lives, and bring more compassion to the interactions that we have with people, be disciples of Christ, and also be willing to accept that we are different, and that that's not only okay, but it's good. And that we don't need to press our foreheads to the ground for anybody.
I mean, I think that's a beautiful answer. And I think that, again, like all things, you know, the right hand and the left hand, and it's the straight and narrow way. We turn neither one way or the other, in our personal discipleship, that, like, we need firm masculine boundaries. And we also need the open, you know, the kind of feminine openness to understand and be patient, be tolerant, and I think first and foremost, we should not get whipped into the frenzy of the vitriol of hating other groups, including other Christians. That we should continue to be friends with them. But I think we would benefit from some boundary setting a little bit, and from some clarity, and learning about them and learning about ourselves. Jake mentioned a scripture earlier that I really found a lot of inspiration from when I was preparing for this, and I'd like to share. And you gave some really welcome pushback on it, Greg, and I think it's wise to consider that pushback. So I propose this with the suggestion that we interrogate it. But this is what, if I might just read these notes I wrote, that perhaps we should consider, as President Nelson kind of differentiated, that we should be disciples of Christ over Christians, right? Christ did not give us that term in taking his name upon us. In fact, he said, not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but he that doeth the will of my Father, which is in heaven. Or many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name, and in thy name have cast out devils, and in thy name done many wonderful works? And then I will profess unto them, I never knew you. Depart from me, ye that work iniquity. Or in the Joseph Smith translation, ye never knew me, and or you never knew me. So then he goes on to say, by this shall men know that ye are my disciples, that ye love one another, versus just calling yourself Christians. The disciples were called Christians by others, not by Christ. Not that that matters, but just just as they were called Mormons by others, not by Christ, right? The Book of Mormon states that the followers of Christ were called Christians by those who did not belong to the church. And as a community, as members of the church, we are Latter-day Saints. But as individuals who follow our Savior, we are disciples of Jesus Christ. So we're the Latter-day Saints as a group. We're disciples of Christ in our heart. And as Jake said, I would just like to read it because I think it's such a powerful testimony. And I think it's really poetic that it's his name that we were kind of maybe overusing. He says, in the Book of Mormon, Mormon says, and behold, I am called Mormon, being called after the land of Mormon, the land in which Alma did establish the church among the people. Yea, the first church which was established among them after their transgression. Behold, I am a disciple of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. I have been called of him to declare his word among his people, that they may have everlasting life. Makes me emotional to read it. We are disciples of Jesus Christ. He's our Lord and Savior. And how important and how beautiful that he was misunderstood and rejected by his own, by the church group that was supposed to welcome him. And so as we take more glory in Christ, ironically, I think we can understand that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints does not need to be part of the whole of the rest of Christendom because it already has it. And we can lead the way in making friends and brotherhood of these of our Christian neighbors by understanding that we are something entirely distinct, and that's okay. So sorry to get a little.
No, that's good stuff. Any final words, Jake?
No, amen. Thank you for having us on, and yeah, this has been really great.
Well, this is an important topic. It's a great topic. It's very apropos here in our time and with the latest events that have happened recently. And so anyway, we're at Barrett, Burgin, and Jake Taylor. Thank you so much. We'll get you back on soon.
Okay.
Thank you for having us.